Welcome, everyone, to the State of Revenue 2025 webinar. The key topic being closing the buying and selling gap. We've got some great guests on the panel here today to talk about some of the most important and dicey issues going on in go-to-market and with customers today. And so we're excited to have you all join us. And there should be time. Feel free to put your comments, obviously, as we're talking, and we'll try to get to some questions at the end. I'm Zach Gropper, CEO of Insight Revenue, and happy to host and welcome this great panel. We're going to start by an introduction to Jeremey Donovan, EVP at Insight Partners. So he's going to be bringing a lot of perspective from his 80 or so companies that he works with on a regular basis, as well as his deep background and experience. DelVecchio, who is CRO at Bloomberg Industry Group. We've got Sam Jacobs here, who is founder and CEO at Pavilion, and going to be leading the discussion and the driver of all this great research, Timur, who is also founder and chief researcher here at Insight Revenue. So I'll give a quick chance for everyone to introduce themselves and start off with the first question, just to get things started, a little icebreaker. So Jeremey, when you quick intro, and then what's the key trend or hottest topic right now for you when you think about the market and the companies that you're supporting?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, and I'm really excited to be on the panel today. Partly because you guys are one of the few folks out there actually doing primary research, right? So few people actually invest in primary research, and so much is regurgitation. So I'm always thrilled to see what you guys put out. So as Zach had mentioned, I'm with Insight Partners, which is different than Insight Revenue, completely unaffiliated. We're a B2B SaaS-focused VC firm with $90 billion in assets under management, over 550 portfolio companies. And the briefest introduction I can provide is I was an engineer, sales leader, marketing leader, a product leader, and I found my way loving RevOps and strategy. Did that for a while and now work advising companies. You'd asked us to prep, a thought about major trends in the world other than AI, or obviously everything is being influenced by AI, but I would say, like, in my role, probably the most important thing I focus on is talent, and thinking about how do companies select CROs, how do companies select RevOps leaders, how do companies select AEs, CSMs, SDRs, and so on. So I do think that's something that is continuing to mature and evolve and to become a far more analytical discipline. To the extent that I put a lot of energy into, thinking about how do you play Moneyball, right? So you get a little bit of an edge in hiring people more effectively. So that's something I can go on at length about, but I think the sort of transformation of talent that's happening, that is being accelerated by AI, is a top trend.
Yep. Thanks, Jeremy. And I know all the time you're getting people saying to you, "Oh, are you guys Insight Revenue?"
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
So sorry about that. But so great kickoff. Kara, over to you. Same question.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm DelVecchio. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Bloomberg Industry Group. I have been here for about 8 months. So I am still doing what I would consider a go-to-market transformation here. And Jeremy's point is incredibly relevant. And I think one of the things that I think about most, which is talent transformation. Not just because I think the selling environment continues to change, yes, because of AI, but for lots of other reasons that people have been writing about for a decade, but also because I do think talent is the reason that we can get an edge in the market. And I think, I agree with everything Jeremey said. I think one thing I'm really focused on is my manager talent and sort of first line seller management. It is the place that I've probably invested the most from a hiring and what are we going to do perspective to make sure that our managers can keep up with what's happening in the selling environment and can also really hire the talent that we will continue to need to drive into our markets. So that's, I guess, a quick summary of what I've been up to, but I'm very excited to be here and have lots of other B2B SaaS experience that I can bring to the table this morning.
Awesome, yeah, and I know you have multi-industry experience and look forward to hearing your reflections on some of the research. Sam, as quick intro of yourself, and obviously you've got go-to-market leaders, founders around the world, bending your ear every day on these issues. So curious to hear, talk a little bit about Pavilion, but also what is the hot button issue? And again, I asked and gave brief in advance that it's not about AI, because we'll talk about it a little later. But over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam. I'm the CEO of Pavilion. Pavilion's the leading community for go-to-market executives in the world. We've got 10,000 members in sales, marketing, customer success, RevOps, and we're focused on helping those people do their jobs more effectively so that they can help their companies and their employers grow those businesses scalably and efficiently. And, I do talk to lots and lots of folks all the time. The number one issue that seems to come up right now, aside from a handful of fast-growing companies that are they shall not be named native, because we're not allowed to talk about it right now, but pipeline generation is the thing that comes up most of the time. And I was in a room with a bunch of CROs, all of whom were companies. The minimum size was 250 million all the way up to 750 million in revenue. And everybody was talking about the difficulty of capturing somebody's interest authentically and separating yourself from the noise, because there's just so much noise, so much communication, so many emails, so many LinkedIn messages. And it's just really hard to figure out what's a real human connection and what isn't in this era. And as a consequence, there's just a lot of companies that are struggling to meet their pipeline requirements, particularly at the CMO level, which is where I've had some interesting conversations.
Awesome. And so without further ado, I'll introduce the context of the research you're about to see, and Timur has led. It's actually a convergence of hundreds and hundreds of interviews and two different very large studies, which Timur is about to describe and talk through, many of which we can see a year-on-year trend and shift. So Timur, over to you to kick us off with the key content.
No, well, thank you, everybody. It's I'm always trying to find a word for what's the word that would describe the current environment. And this year, thanks to FactSet, I found something they'd published, and I transformed the numbers. And this year, I would say the word of the year, apparently, from a large corporate perspective at least, is uncertainty. And I think that's uncertainty in many different ways. And certainly in our work with clients and when I talk to people, we've heard that expressed in lots of different ways. People talk about sort of longer sales cycles, projects being stalled, not quite coming to fruition. But uncertain in the sense that what I'm also hearing from people is that by and large, business is actually held pretty constant. Sam, as you said, there are a couple of people who are going gangbusters, but by and large, as the former CEO of Citibank once said, it seems that we're all continuing to dance. The music certainly hasn't stopped yet. But I think uncertainty also has driven a lot of behavior change. It's driving a lot of behavior change in that people are becoming a little bit more short-term focused. A couple of clients have told us they've gone for the de-risked strategy, is the way they put it. And generally, everybody seems to be sort of battening the hatches, so to speak. And we've then seen a clear expression of that actually in the year-on-year data. So this is from a diagnostic where we ask different organizations, where in the GTM process do you think you'll have the greatest impact by making another investment? And it's everything from sort of front of the funnel, awareness building, interest generation, towards the end, retention, expansion, sales, and everything in between. And year on year, last year was the blue, this year is the orange. We're sort of seeing a little bit of it's sort of gone up towards the other end. And very specifically, what I think we're seeing is a little bit less emphasis apparently being placed on awareness building and interest generation, and a little bit more investment in terms of retention and expansion. And then something has to give, a little less focus perhaps on the close and contracting per se.
I was going to interject on this. I think this ties so nicely to Sam's comment about pipeline generation, as we're all stumped that, outbound has been less and less and less effective. It's not like this is a sudden thing. This has been a gradual decline in the effectiveness of outbound for so long. So it's like you can't just hire more salespeople and increase revenue. And it takes longer to build a brand to drive the inbound cycle. It takes longer to build a partner channel to drive the partner generation cycle. So it's like if you're going to try to get a return on investment, you got to more heavily towards your existing customers.
Yeah. That's perfect. That was my question was going to be, so is this resignation or the fact that people have fixed outbound? I think we have your
Resignation
answer.
for sure. Yeah.
I think outbound can still work. I just think that, outbound, of course, has to be done right. And I think, Sam's point before we sort of got on to the webinar itself around, you're going to use AI, you're going to kind of shortcut the work that it takes to actually cut through the noise. That's what's not working. And so I think it's still really hard to do it right. And if you're not willing to put in the time and the investment, you can't create the opportunities, and so you go to your customer base. And by the way, I'm also sitting in an exceptionally healthy company, so I have a lot of benefit of being able to do different things without worrying about next quarter's revenue because we've got a great base and we're very lucky. So I do want to have that caveat, but I do think, to me, outbound is not dead. It just has to be thought of even more carefully and even more specifically. What is your strategy? What are the customers you're really trying to reach, and how are you going to do that the right way and really authentically and meaningfully at scale? So I guess I do not believe outbound is dead. I just think it continues to get hard, and it's a lot of time investment for organizations to do it right.
I want to agree with Kara. I don't think there's any motion or channel that's dead. I think they're all harder. And I also think that I don't know that they are, well, maybe they are. I think we were all a little, we had it a little easy over the period maybe from 2010 to 2020. And I think that some of the tactics we used hadn't been used before. Our email addresses, if you can believe it, back in 2012, 15, were relatively under attacked. And now, if you, we were sending lots and lots of emails back then, but I think it's probably been a significant, increase. And so I think every channel is available to people if they want to put in the time to do it really, really well. And what that means is actually pressure on price points, I think, because doing something well is another way of saying expensively. And that's also ties back to Jeremy's original point about talent. It's going to require the best talent with the most thoughtfulness, curiosity, and creativity, and then the best RevOps and the best orchestration. It's definitely possible. But you're going to need price points that justify hiring that talent and supporting those motions. And if you don't have that, then there's this sort of messy middle where if you're at a $20,000 price point, a $10,000 price point, it's pretty difficult. And then you're going to probably need to figure out, can I build virality into my product some way? Can I make it PLG in some way? Can I get some cheap acquisition channel that is a function of how much people love it? And if you don't have something that people love, you're probably dead in the water. And even then, it might not be enough because you still need really elegantly executed outbound and really any channel to succeed in this environment.
I wanted to just add one thing on the elegantly executed outbound, which is what's old is new. I'm a huge John McMahon devotee of PTC Blade Logic days and so on. And they were 20 plus years ago. When they did outbound pipeline generation, it wasn't about the AE alone engaging the prospect, right? It was about the AE engaging. It was about the first line sales manager engaging all the way up to the CEO of the company. And like that multi-threaded, we always think about multi-threading from an opportunity perspective, but multi-threading is incredibly important from a top of the funnel outbound pipeline generation perspective. And it's interesting to me. I was talking to a CRO yesterday and it was that was an epiphany for him, which I was kind of surprised about, but that's a what's old is new thing. But Kara, I'm curious, any other tips on stuff in outbound that's working today?
I mean, it's interesting. Like what's old is new, but let's make it faster and a little bit easier for ourselves in the right way with the right strategy. And let's make sure we're using all of these different things around us, the content we're producing, the marketing channels we're owning, the paid search we're doing, all of the different things that we have at our disposal to really look at this 360 view of the customer and to make the most of that in our outbound approach.
That gives me a good transition, actually, like in terms of, so what happens if you don't do this well? And if you don't do this well, I think you end up with what we're seeing here. So we asked both buyers and sellers, and buyers it's a lot of procurement, candidly, in terms of, how trustworthy do you find different claims around the things you're looking at? And two things are interesting, here. By and large, both sellers and buyers do actually believe that promises around sort of product functionality, performance, service are believable. Salespeople a bit more so than the buyers. But I think the really interesting part is trustworthiness around the ROI on the business case. Neither party finds them all that credible, which I think is incredibly revealing, actually. And I think it tells you a story in terms of why the conversation often ends up going back to product features. Well, both parties believe it. But it also tells me at least, that maybe sellers are avoiding having the hard conversation around. So given who you are and the infrastructure you have and the ecosystem that you live in, how is what we have going to align with what you have? Like, how are we going to make this fit? And my sense is, this ties into the outbound discussion a little bit. Like, outbound done well requires a lot of research and figuring out how is this going to work. And maybe that's not what's happening. And so I'll that's my observation around that trust gap. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that and what you think. And does this align with what you're all seeing?
I would say definitely aligns with what I'm seeing. And I think there's a stat, and Jeremy's probably the person to fact check me on it, and I'm happy to do it. But I read somewhere, it might have been from G2, that the number of new software companies grows 7% every quarter. And when I see trustworthiness around ROI in the business case, what I think is that everybody's making a bunch of promises because it's such a competitive environment. And I think particularly with new technologies that can help build new platforms very, very quickly, I think buyers are rightfully skeptical that all of these different people can do what they say they're going to do. And I also think, we were talking before we went live about, Matt Dixon and Brent Adamson, and one of the books that they recently wrote was The Jolt Effect, and they talked about the fear of messing up, not the fear of missing out. And I really think, particularly with AI, and I know we're not allowed to mention it, but nevertheless, at the enterprise level, when you're thinking about data privacy and you're thinking about this new technology that IT, that information security, that procurement, that nobody really knows what the risks are, but they know they're very, very large. Jamie Dimon was at the Acquired live podcast recording 2 nights ago at Radio City Music Hall, and he was saying they spend $900 million a year on cybersecurity. And my point is, there is a very legitimate fear among buyers that if they buy the wrong tool, they're going to get fired and they're going to jeopardize their career. And I really think that relates to this skepticism around ROI. It's just, I don't know if I can trust this enough to risk my career. So let me just figure out, to your point, Timur, does it do the things that I need it to do? Let's put aside the fact that it's going to totally transform my business, because we all know that change management and business transformation is actually much harder than sometimes sellers, imply. But curious to hear what the other panelists think.
I want to second the motion on the Jolt Effect. Arguably the best sales book that's been written in the last couple of years. That book, for folks who haven't read it, basically argues that the first half of the sales cycle is about creating value, and the second half of the sales cycle, you're still working to create value, but you're more there about mitigating risk. And I think so much of that risk mitigation is helping people believe that they're going to get some form, of ROI out of this. I worked for a CEO a few years back who said, whenever we would bring a business case, it's going to take twice as long, it's going to cost twice as much, and it's going to get half the return. And if you apply all those assumptions to whatever business case gets put in front of him and it still makes sense, then he would greenlight the project. I mean, that's one thought. I had one other thought, which is when I saw this, I was reminded of the Gong study from years back, which I went and looked up, and the Gong study showed that people who use ROI language lavishly have a 27% lower close rate than those who don't use ROI language. So I did, not a surprise, but I did have a chuckle that even the sellers themselves don't believe their own, their own BS about ROI.
Yeah. I suppose it's the sales equivalent of saying "trust me" or "candidly,"
Yeah,
which then
exactly.
begs the question.
Which is show don't tell, right? Like, don't say
Right.
trust me. Show them, like, hey, if a seller shows me the actual distribution of implementation times for post sale, that is a show don't tell, right? If the seller says, hey, we failed, in these instances, and we failed because X, Y, Z happened, and I'm going to prevent those things from happening, like, that's a show don't tell.
Great point.
So we've got a question from Andrew on the chat here. It's good timing just to Timur, from your perspective and then the panel, obviously. You've been tracking this kind of data in different ways over the years. So do we believe this, what makes us believe that the trust gap is getting larger, especially around the ROI and business case piece? Was one of the questions.
Sam, I think what you said is a large part of it. The choice is overwhelming. So there's just an enormous number of people who then all sound the same. Honestly, it's an exercise we do with clients. Look at their website versus some sort of competitors' clients. They'll all say many of the same things. Like, a value proposition is a really easy thing to replicate in words. It's a very hard thing to replicate indeed. So again, I think a lot of it ends up with the incumbent, because the incumbent can genuinely say, look, we've done this before. That's a big problem. And then I think the volume of outbound, honestly, like, again, it's just like it's overwhelming amounts of marketing. Zach and I have been in business for like roughly 2 years. The amount of email I get on topics that are completely off topic, completely batshit out there, is really quite surprising. So yeah, it's like my word is no longer my bond. And then I will go to AI as well. I think makes it easy to sound glib and smart. And that I think that comes associated with a risk. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of what I've seen. I think it's a genuinely widening gap, not an ever-present thing.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot. Just when cash was flowing, people bought a ton of stuff that they didn't use or they didn't get value from. And so when the CFO is now breathing down your neck and saying, let's not make that same mistake again in your next purchase, especially if we're thinking about software or technology purchases, that I think, people have been more than burned once, and they're much more reserved about making a mistake in a current purchase, especially with so much scrutiny around spend now, would be something I've heard. Anything else on that topic before we move to the next one?
Kara, what do you think in terms of the trust gap?
I'm reflecting on the comments. I agree with everything that we've been talking about. I think that noise, maybe I'm a little bit with Sam and his prior comments, that noise has been happening for at least a decade in my mind, right? The amount of, now not the 7% every quarter of a new software vendor popping up and getting in your inbox, but I do think the noise around everybody's value proposition seems similar. There's lots of material that you can go use. Remember, sort of Gartner study about how far the buyer is in the sales cycle before they even come to you, right? They've already done all their learning and all their research. And now think about AI, how much faster it makes that, right? But I think about, when I read about this, I think about, I'm a huge fan of Dan Pink, so Jeremey to PTC, me to Dan Pink, and his to sell is human and all of the different things that he talks about. but and maybe this is also what's old is new again, but to me, this is so much about the storytelling. Even your example, Jeremy, right? Here's the story of what's happened when we've implemented before, and here's exactly what it looks like. It just becomes so important, I think, for our sellers to have the experience and to have the understanding of what really happens in customer organizations, what really changes. What does that feel like? Let me show you a video. Let me show you, this opportunity to really get close to what a customer implementation looked like and how it felt and what metrics truly changed. Not a calculator that I made as your sales rep saying you're going to get 800% ROI and isn't my price great, right? I think that's the some of the pieces that I think about when we have this conversation. And by the way, to get a rep to be able to tell a story authentically because they know it, they understand the customer impact is a lot of work, a lot of enablement, a lot of tooling, a lot of, things that your marketing team has to support in order for reps to do that really effectively, in my mind.
That's brilliant. It's also a good cue to me in terms of why I think where I think the story is often incomplete. So this is some data, Jeremy, and you touched on this as well. So this is some data that actually surprised me a little bit. So again, this is buyers, sellers. We asked them number of people involved in a typical purchase. These numbers are actually lower than say what Gartner finds, and so I suspect this is more about like the principles rather than the large buying group per se. But the point is, sellers still consistently underestimate the number of people that are actually involved in a purchase, and I suspect it's partly because you never actually see them. So, if you're selling cybersecurity, for example, if you're fortunate, maybe you get to meet with a company's CTO. But I assume that most of the 6,000 odd cybersecurity vendors will never meet with the CTO of a large company. And yet, the CTO is clearly crucial. So I'm curious as to, why you think the gap exists, but then also how do you fix for it?
I have a comment on this one, which is I was having a conversation with a CEO of a company that is involved in mutual success plan software or closed plan software, and he was lamenting a little bit, like if he made a mistake, like that business, that line of business hasn't really been super successful, right? In the go-to-market tech space. Yet I find it, in my little intellectual academic high chair, to be really, really important. And he said it's because that's an ought to product, right? That there are some things that people know they need, there are some things that are latent needs, but then there are some products of things that people ought to do, and it's really hard to create and sell an ought to. So this is one that, like, I actually am stumped and hoping to learn a little bit from Kara and Sam on this. It's like, why don't sellers build relationship maps? Like, why don't sellers consistently multi-thread? I'm too far removed in my sort of, again, like more academic position to know this. Maybe Kara, you might be the closest of the three of us.
I mean, it's, to me, again, it's all about the time investment and the complexity. Now, by the way, there are lots of AI tools, right? Like, think about People AI. I think they're brilliant on how you actually do the relationship map at scale and how you understand who's really engaging with you and who's not, as an example. And by the way, there are, 100 other, to Sam's point, 7% more every quarter that I look around, how you do effective relationship mapping. But I think it's a lot of work. And I think we still have this idea as a seller that it's okay because my champion is going to go internally and make the case. And I just don't think that line of thinking works anymore. And I think we still have to push sellers out of that comfort zone of, we're selling to an in-house team. We're going to use the head of legal operations. Well, yes, they're going to be your champion. But, to the points we're making, if you don't have the general counsel excited about what you're doing, you are not going to make that sale. And if you are, it's going to take you probably 3 times as long from a sales cycle perspective. But I think that is also a lot of hard work. And then that means you have to really enable your sellers to understand what is the story, the language, the appropriate thought leadership and other things that I'm doing with the general counsel, who I may never meet, with, versus the head of legal operations, versus, the other folks that might be involved in the buying process. So I think what happens is you tend to, sort of hope cast, have a lot of faith in whoever you're working with, because the amount of time it takes to actually effectively work across an organization is significant. And then it goes back to Sam's point. If your price point is 20K, I also think you have this idea in your mind, well, 20K isn't that difficult of a decision, right? But then it goes back to, I don't think buyers trust us even at 20K, and they're not going to say, sure, this is easy, I'll just go try it. It's still, I think, high stakes for any buyer. So, you got a lot of different, I think, trends impacting this slide. But Sam, curious about your opinion too.
I completely agree with everything you said, Kara. And I think I just, where do I come back to? Because I'm constantly trying to like structure these ideas in my head. And I come back to the talent gap that Jeremy talked about at the very beginning. I think selling is much harder. And I think most organizations, probably including mine internally, are not equipped to enable people to be successful. And I also think it might be changing now, but we went through a period from 2020 through maybe last year when we have to remember that most people coming out of school did not have an in-office training environment. And they were learning how to do these very hard jobs from their bedrooms with roommates around and from their living room and from Zooms. And I just think the quality of engagement is not there. And this is a hard job. Kara, you were talking about what do your buyers actually do? And there's just a fundamental lack of curiosity among most sellers. They haven't thought about it. Do they read the newspaper? I mean, do they go to the newspaper websites? Most of them are getting, and I hate to sound generational, I know I sound like a fogey, but, are they getting their news from TikTok? Are they curious about the world? Are they curious about the lives of the people that they're talking to? And oftentimes the answer is no. And they've also, so I just think, this isn't about young people versus old people at all. It is just about the fact that enabling sellers to be effective in this world is very, very hard. It was always hard, but particularly in a remote world where we don't have that osmosis of sitting next to the person that's doing the best and listening to Kara on the phone so that I can incorporate some of what she's saying into my next phone call. I just think that there's this massive, massive talent gap that still exists in the go-to-market function, and that leads to people not, they're told, to Kara's point, they're told that there's a decision maker. Zach, I think in this research, and Timur, you point out that we are rigidly adherent to certain kind of qualification methodologies like MEDDIC or BANT. And so what that means is I check the box. What is your budget, sir or ma'am?
Yes.
Not understanding that they understand too, and nobody's having a fun time with this conversation because you're not really talking about problems they're trying to solve. So all of this to say, it's very hard to find good talent, and we don't do a good enough job of investing in capability and potential to up-level people that can do the job well.
I'm gonna pull one more like John McMahon-ism in here. The PTC folks love hiring based on ICE criteria, ICCE, and it hits exactly what you were saying. So intelligence, number one, curiosity, which is Sam's what Sam just went through, conscientiousness and experience, right? Like we know that and we fail to do it, and it's become, to Sam's point, like it's become so much more important right now in a difficult selling environment than it was in a easy low interest rate world.
I just have to pull on this thread of curiosity too, Sam, because I sat down with my head of enablement, and we, again, as I said at the beginning, have been really investing in our sales training, our sales enablement. I think it's so critical to try to bridge the skill gap. And I said to Jenna McCoy, who's brilliant, and I give her a ton of credit for getting things done around here on this very topic, I said, what do you think is the one thing that we need to hire for that we potentially don't have right now? And it was exactly what Sam said. It was curiosity. And I think it is because we deliver these rigid scripts and we say, here's your list of discovery questions. Here are the things that you must know to advance to the next stage. And by the way, I love rigor and I love process, but if it doesn't leave room for real curiosity, you've got a problem in this buying environment.
And on that, the topic that we've held off on a little bit. So you all spoke about, like the lack of investment in enablement. But here's something: everybody's investing a ton of money in various ways. And this is some data was from earlier this year. How are people using AI? Almost everybody's using it. I imagine the numbers are like close to 100% at this point. And I do think the sort of the chat engines in particular, in terms of how they mirror you, are very interesting to me. It's do they actually steal curiosity, or are they just the perfect answer machines? I don't know, to be honest. But the three of you have far more direct experience. I'm very curious. Like, where do you see AI work, and what do you think is still actually a question mark? And
Who's
Sam,
waiting in first?
yeah, I was going to say, Sam, we'll start you with you on that one, since you were raring to go on the topic.
I All right, so a couple places that it really, really works, and it's hard to call Clay AI. It's not necessarily large language model stuff, but data enrichment, and these platforms that use multiple data sources, as they say, to waterfall into like the most accurate contact information and really figuring out where people are and what they know and do. I think AI works really, really well there. I think, I'm an early advisor and investor in this company called Fixer, which has grown, is growing like a gangbuster, is growing from, I don't know, they're 12 million, they were at zero, 6 months ago. And candidly, I was a little skeptical about the product because it drafts these AI generated emails in your inbox that, for me, as somebody that cares about quality of communication, I find a little generic. And you can sense, what they call bot breath in all of this content creation that's happening through AI, because they have these sort of, and I think, Timur, the word that you use, glib, is exactly the right word, where there's these little mannerisms, these little tropes that you can tell are AI in nature. And so even though I'm an advisor to the company, I was taken aback by how quickly they're growing. But then I realized, upon second thought, that, most people are not very good writers. And, if you can take a team of real estate brokers, the 10,000 real estate brokers that all work for Brown, Harris, Stevens, or Compass, and you can take them from their existing quality of writing, and even if it is AI generated, it's still a much higher quality than they were at, and it's instant because they can click send right away. It seems to me that it actually does work. So even though I'm a little skeptical on the drafting emails and other communications, I do think that that is a very, very valid use case. I think there's this idea that you can do deep personalization at scale. That I haven't seen, not to sophisticated buyers. The AI SDR idea. So you take this enrichment, I take your name, Timur, I run it through Clay, I figure out your LinkedIn profile, I figure out where you work, and then I do some enrichment to figure out what does Insight Revenue do, I get a description of it, and then I drop it into some kind of personalized email at scale. It still feels fairly robotic. It actually doesn't feel that different from Outreach or SalesLoft, even though they're positioning themselves as next gen. And it still does the thing of increasing the volume of noise in the pipe without providing a lot of signal or clarity. So that's an area where I'm a little skeptical. Last thing I'll say, I want to hear, of course, from my fellow panelists, but Jason Lemkin's talking about, he uses Artisan AI as an AI SDR, and he's talking about how effective it is. And then later in one of his tweets, he commented that, well, this was to existing customers, which is a little silly, because the whole point of it is to enable cold outbound. So yes, if you write any kind of email to people that already know you, they're much more likely to write you back. The question is, can you write a great email to somebody that doesn't know you? So I think, and again, the Pavilion community is somewhat skeptical about AI SDRs. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. One last thing I will say. My business specifically, community, is actually, we are seeing a very, very powerful use case for AI. So if you know Pavilion, you know that a lot of the real-time chat happens in Slack. And there's the complaint about Slack historically is it's very noisy. Everybody's answering questions, you can't tell anything. Well, now we're using some AI chatbots to synthesize all of the conversations that are happening in public channels in Slack. And for the first time, community actually is becoming much more valuable and useful than it was even 2 years ago. Because you can ask the question, what does the community think about AI SDRs? And it will give you a very thoughtful, detailed response. And it will say, these are the people you should talk to. These are the conversations that have been had. This is a list of the current vendors. So I think AI for communities or for large group discussion or large group communication is actually going to be I would say, transformational, because it makes Pavilion, my community, an expert network in a way that or a Gartner in a way that it definitely was not a year ago, which I think is quite interesting. But Jeremy, Kara.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, AI it is a real struggle, by the way, to find AI use cases that are going to have meaningful impact on top line growth or on profitability, right? Like it actually is. I think it's actually quite hard. You mentioned, I wrote down a little list of them just now as you were talking, Sam, and you mentioned the data enrichment one, absolutely. The one that's on the screen right here, which is really about research and drafting, absolutely. The three others that I've seen, one is inbound SDRs, inbound response. Like that is something that does work. The outbound SDR to cold outbound SDR, we're all very, very skeptical of that. We've had portfolio companies test it and fail with that. And then the two others that are on my list, I mean, the number one and two of all AI, right, is coding and customer support. So coding, like not in the context of this conversation, but customer support absolutely in the context of this conversation. So that one is like the most obvious use case. And then the other one I've seen work, to the extent that you have to do these, is RFP response. It can really, really streamline RFP response. The advice used to be don't respond to any RFP unless you influence that RFP beforehand and you basically custom tailored it before it even went out. I think, and I've seen it, like this is unlocking the ability to respond to RFPs in a way that's just more cost effective, so that even though your percentage hit rate might be lower, the cost of going after it is also dramatically lower.
Kara, how's
These
Bloomberg
are being
using?
written by AI. So it only makes sense.
Sam, what did you say before I weigh in here?
I was saying, how's Bloomberg using AI?
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you. It's interesting because I think our parent company on the LP side has 9,000 engineers that are doing amazing things with AI, and I think really on the forefront. But I do think, generally speaking, we're skeptical. As we talk about buyers being skeptical about the ROI, what are we really going to get if we go invest in some of these tools? And I couldn't agree more, Jeremy, on sort of the use cases. I think and what Sam was saying, the research, the intent data, what does this customer look like and what are they going to care about, to me is the best use case for sellers around, I can speed your understanding. I still have a lot of skepticism myself around outbound, AI tooling. I will say at Pluralsight, my prior company, we used Reggie AI very successfully. And part of that whole, notion is that it continues to learn your tone, the way that you write. And to Sam's point, if you're not a great writer and communicator, you're sort of leveling up that whole segment of your population overnight with this tooling. Do I think that it fundamentally changed how hard outbound is? No. And I think it might have contributed to some noise, but we did see much higher sort of interaction rates and connection rates and a stronger pipeline generation. So I think with the right buyers and the right sort of leaders and the right use cases, sure, but I still have some skepticism here around whether that's where we want to invest. And I do think, just like everybody writes about, right, the activities that are most repetitive, like customer support, like how you research a company where you can write a prompt and use it repeatedly, those are the things that I think I'm most excited about to just speed some of that work that needs to happen for the true preparation to go call a customer or to go email a customer. But one other thing, I know coding is not on our sort of radar, but there was a super interesting study, very small, of engineers from Axios yesterday, where, same story that we're talking about, right? Everybody thinks the ROI for coding is so high. And engineers self-report that they're 20% more productive when they get to use these coding tools. Yet, based on Dora metrics on how you measure engineers and coding progress, et cetera, they're actually 19% slower. And again, small study, but I was totally fascinated yesterday. We're like, this is the same thing we're dealing with in go to market, right? Are they actually creating the right ROI, and are we getting the right outcomes from these investments? So it's just I think this will continue to be the challenge in this space, and it will continue to be, where are you going to strategically invest and be really thoughtful about the strategy before you go buy the next tool.
The one thought I did have, and I would want to get your reaction to it a little bit, is my suspicion is that it's actually going to be more useful for buyers, because a lot of what you're doing is summarizing information that you receive in, because second time what you do, you create a spec. You have your internal checklists, you get these documents, you're going to have to compare them. That, I think, that's an interesting thing to me. That has risk associated with it, and I'd be curious to know what you're seeing there.
It is the flip side of the RFP thing, right?
Yeah.
And I have absolutely heard this of buyers using AI to compare RFPs. I mean, personal story literally from yesterday that ties a lot of this together. So I was on a trip recently, and one of the people I was with that I met is a roofing manufacturer. And he was asking me questions about my roof. He said, "Oh, you really need a new roof." So yesterday, I like called a roofing contract. I called two roofing contractors, right? Because I wanted two quotes. And like this tells you the power of like talent and sales. So one guy showed up like that day. He spent 2 hours with me. I had in my mind a price. This is the ultimate commodity, right? Like a roof is a total commodity. I had in my mind a price based on Googling things. He walked out 2 hours later, and I paid literally double what I thought I was going to pay, and I didn't even bother with the second quote. So like that's the power of it. But how this ties to this is this morning I was out for a walk, and I was like, you know what? I should have taken his proposal and fed that into ChatGPT and asked like, is this a good proposal? Is this price right? I was just, I don't know. I kind of want to reward good salesmanship at this point in my life, and like that was my way of doing it.
You're a
Brilliant.
human. You made a human decision.
Yes,
Also,
yes.
it's your roof. Do you really want it to leak?
Well,
That was like I've made penny wise and pound foolish decisions before, but again, like it just shows you like the well-trained salesperson, right? And he read me well, like he there was no I forgot the term Sam used, like the Chat GPT terminology of
bot breath.
Bot breath,
bot
I
breath.
love that.
He had no bot breath at all, which was great, refreshing.
Cool. So,
I
so
think it
speaking of,
speaks to the importance of human to human interaction, Jeremy.
Yes.
I think like what we're seeing is that in a world of sameness, in the sea of, AI, that you can almost call what you experienced artisanal in a way,
It was.
and I think there's a premium that people will pay for a handcrafted, authentic experience. And sometimes that just might mean the idea that you're talking to an actual human that's actually interested in what you do.
By the way,
I love the artisanal word. Yeah.
yeah, there's so much interesting stuff that we could talk about. I know Timur wants to move us on, but just the marketing implications of what we're talking about are fascinating to me. From even Sam, what is the artisanal experience? Is it actually going back to what's old is new again? Do we need to do more events? And do we need to, actually engage with our customers in person and show them what we've got human to human? I saw a really interesting post on LinkedIn. I forget who wrote it, about events being kind of the new way, the most effective channel to actually drive results in your market. But then also just this whole opportunity to think about, if somebody puts your brand, your value proposition, whatever you're doing, into AI and compares you with the other three vendors that you might be competing with, how do you stack up? And what is the content that you're going to put out into the universe so that you actually stack first in that ChatGPT or Claude or, whoever you're using into that output? It's actually a really important time for marketers to understand how much the environment is changing and what they need to do differently to, again, enable sellers to be successful and to create the right sort of lead opportunities and interactions with the customer base.
100%. I mean,
so
and
speaking of bot breath, I did want to move us along to talent, because that's been a dominant topic here. So this is the buyer's perspective in terms of what's done well, what's done less well. First one won't surprise anybody. Buyers generally think sellers are great at managing the relationships. Second one, and this is a much replicated finding, by the way, is that both buyers and sellers tend to think that the other is really good at negotiations. Neither, if you ask them, will ever agree to this, but I think it is both parties have fundamentally misunderstand each other's perspective. Sellers, I think, often fail to empathize with the urgency a buyer might feel, especially if it's a more fundamental good. I think it's less true if it's discretionary, but if you have supply, somebody typically does need something within a certain time frame to perform at a certain rate, otherwise they don't have a product. I think it's the third three that are interesting, and we've sort of spoken around this. Like the gaps are still, and maybe it's back to what's old is new again. They are around delivering insights. They're around identifying ways of delivering additional value. And then the third one I think is particularly interesting. It's buyers also don't think that sellers are necessarily that great at supplying the required technical expertise. And I extrapolating that, I think that is literally not necessarily knowing how the buyer is going to use something, so they can't necessarily advise on how it best fits or aligns. So I'll stop there. Love to get your thoughts on this.
I'll say that my experience with sellers, but maybe I don't work with the right sellers talented enough. But I will say that the biggest gap I see is that sellers think buyers A, know how to buy, and B, know what they want and how things are supposed to work. But maybe I work in a category, which is community, which doesn't have a lot of clear product definition and clear product requirements. But I find that sellers, novice sellers, are often saying, how will you use this? Do you want it? Not even understanding that the buyer doesn't even know how to evaluate. Now, they can use AI maybe, but I think there's just this massive, almost challenger. And by challenger, I don't mean being confrontational, of course. I mean the classic definition, which is commercial teaching. There's just a misteaching opportunity from sellers to say, this is how people like you buy. This is what you're going to need to do in order to get this solution implemented. And this is where it's going to be most helpful for you.
This goes back, I think, to what Jeremy and I were talking about before, right? First of all, so much of the right-hand side to me is about reps having the right level of curiosity and actually asking deep questions to be able to understand if their buyer doesn't understand the use case, doesn't understand the way that they might value the product internally. And then so much of it goes back to the enablement of our sales team around what are the stories we're giving them that are, deep on what does the experience feel like? What can you expect? What are the things or the hurdles that you might face, and how are we going to overcome those together post-sale, that I think we tend to shy away from a little bit because we're just driving to the close, right? And we want to get the sale done. But I think so much of this goes back to that earlier conversation around what are the reps that who are the reps that we're hiring? What are the core sort of fundamental skills or traits that they have, and then how are we enabling those stories to really deliver the insights, the ways that we can talk about additional value with real authenticity and connection on that customer, with that customer.
Yeah, and my takeaway here is staring at the right-hand side. It ties together the themes we have around trust. It ties together the themes we have around talent. Specifically, I have CEOs sometimes come to me and say, why don't I just fire all my AEs and just have my sales engineers sell, because they're so much, when I go out with them, they're so much better. Mm-hmm. And I think what you see here is, and this applies to maybe like a 50K plus, maybe 100K plus ARR ACV type of sale, but the stuff on the left-hand side is the stuff that salespeople are supposed to do, right? And the stuff on the right-hand side is the stuff that the sales engineer is supposed to do. And they really need to be different humans. Like, I'm not going to trust the sales for whatever reason, right? Sample size of one, but I see it plenty of times, is like people just don't trust salespeople to bring insights because they just feel that their incentives are not are not fully aligned. Whereas they do trust sales engineers, even though they get paid by the same companies, they just do, right? It's a personality thing, it's a delivery thing, it's a knowledge thing, but it also is an incentives thing. So to me, this reinforces the value of sales engineers and like the dream of enabling AEs to do to like use AI to take on the sales engineers part of the job, I think is a false dream. You really need the separation of
Yes.
humans.
By the way, if you didn't read Jeremy's post on this, you should, because thank God, you created some some rationality around, let's not fire all of our AEs and just have sales engineers. There is some combination, but I couldn't agree with you more, Jeremy. And this really shows you exactly when and how you should be using your sales engineers, your solutions consultants, whatever you call them, right, in the sales process, and exactly how to incentivize each party to do what they need to do to drive a successful sort of relationship and outcome.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. I wanted to close with some key recommendations. We've spoken a lot about essentially, we are no longer in an environment where somebody sort of driven enough, enough can probably succeed on their own. They haven't necessarily had the sort of the right apprenticeship, perhaps. So I think what we're seeing is a need to sort of look back at some of these fundamentals, which we break out in terms of strategy, people, process, tools. Strategically, I think there's like a reversion back to wanting to understand the customer. And that's not just the person you're talking to, that's their boss, their executives, the people in charge of strategy, trying to understand, why did they even come to you? People, we've spent a lot of time on that. I think there's now consensus that actually the talent need, the training development need is perhaps larger than it ever was, if only because, for 4 or 5 years, we all sat in our rooms and we lack practice, perhaps. The sales process, Sam, you touched on this. I think we have very rigid sales processes that are usually around our needs. Specifically, I've had the question, do you have money? That's not really discovery. I think. And then the right tools. I think everybody agrees with that one, by the way, that the tool should serve the people, not the other way around. But candidly, I still see a lot of people buying tools in the hope that, well, maybe that'll fix this. And so I think that takes a little bit more thought. So we think those are the recommendations. Go back to fundamentals. And here on the dot, wanted to thank you very much. Zach, I don't know, do we want to risk a couple of questions?
I think so. Yeah, to everyone who's tuned in, first of all, thank you so much to our amazing panel. I want to keep you all on schedule. Your questions, send them to us. Obviously, we work deeply with dozens and dozens of companies on these different areas, and so we'd love to be able to talk about how companies are dealing with these challenges, what types of best practices do you want to implement, and answer any of the questions. So do keep the discussion going on LinkedIn, where the event is, and thank you for tuning in.